Howdy, everybody. It is Sen, and that guy up there is Hafiz, and that guy over there is Scott Preston. And we're here with Maple Syrup this week. And our special guest, Scott Preston, is a professor at the University of New Brunswick, where he does research and study on analog games, game design, and the history of games in specifically Canada, I guess, right? Because we're all Canadian, so why not? That's great. So welcome, welcome, welcome. How are you?
Hi guys, I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
Anytime. And welcome everybody who's watching the show. Howdy, howdy. Hafiz, what's up with you this week?
Nothing too much. I have to catch up on a whole bunch of stuff from my crowdfunding campaign, so that's the plan for this weekend. And then otherwise, I'm super excited to speak with Scott. We bumped into one another a couple of years ago at Protospiel North. And then I did not realize that when I reached out to you. I knew that you were doing work on a book on Canadian board game history. So I wrote, and you're like, "Yeah, we know one another already. I played your
A little
basketball
bit.
game." I'm like, "Yeah, you might have played my game about like fossils." I'm like, "Oh, no, it was about railroads." And I'm like, "Wait,
Yeah,
was it this game?" And you're like, "Yeah." And so okay, well, we need to extend the conversation on the show. So I just ignored him from emails there on out.
Yeah. So you just kind of like you're getting reacquainted. This is the meet cute has already happened, and we're on
Mhm.
to the second episode of the show.
We're using this as our own personal uh, get together. Yeah,
Yeah, that's fine. That's
reunion. There
okay.
we go. That's the word I'm looking
Yeah,
Yeah,
for.
the reunion. That's right. Yeah.
yes, but
So
Sen
welcome to the show,
Sen,
Scott. Oh yeah, keep going.
you and I met one time before too. Do you
Yes,
remember
we have
that?
met before.
Yeah,
Yes, I do.
uh,
When Scott,
online.
when Hafiz said, "Oh, and it'll be Scott Preston," I said, "We've talked before." And then he mentioned, "Oh yeah, he's a professor at uni." Yeah, we've definitely talked before, because I was fascinated by what you were doing there as well. You had written a post in a forum, and I had replied to you about that, and thought what you're working on was really cool. And so now it
Yeah,
kind of comes full circle, and we can talk about a lot of the stuff that you had just kind of been dipping your toe into the whole pool of game design when you and I first talked, and then I guess when you met Hafiz, you had like started and you're doing it, and now
yeah.
a couple years later, it's like, oh, there's actual stuff that's happening, which is really cool to hear. So welcome, Scott. Scott, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe even your origin story? Like, how did you get to be so darn cool? How did that happen?
Wow. Um, well, I how far back do we go? I think a lot of
Your
people,
childhood?
yeah, childhood, of course, yeah, yeah.
It's
I
games. We're talking about
definitely
games, so
grew up playing games with a board game home for sure. Um, but I don't have the typical origin story. A lot of people talk about playing role-playing games, like
mhm.
from my generation, and getting into games through D&D. Instead, mine was a little bit different. I played baseball simulation. I was of a big baseball fan and sports fan, and my I think my strongest memories of playing games as a kid were playing this game called Pursue the Pennant, which is kind of a more advanced version of Stratomatic baseball or those kinds of games.
Mhm.
And I played that for years, and I think that definitely did something. Put
It
something in
changed your
my head
brain.
back then about and wanting to just like how it all worked with the cards and the dice and how you could play a whole season and um, what start wanting to make up your own rules. And so something went into my brain there. But when I went to university, I was obsessed with film in my 20s, and I ended up doing film studies and ended up going all the way doing a PhD and becoming a film studies professor. That's what I got hired to do at UNB. That was in 2010, but right around the same time, around 2008, 2009, I got introduced to Catan, and I got introduced to Eurogame Invasion and modern hobby games. So I had this sort of side thing while I was trying to write my thesis in 2008, 2009, 2010 of like rediscovering my love for board games and discovering all these other cool games that are out there. and it reignited my interest in designing too. So I did a lot of procrastinating from my thesis writing by coming up with game design ideas. So I have a whole drawer full of ideas from about 2009 to about, like COVID, basically, like prototypes and ideas and things like that. And I think it was during COVID that I decided that I wanted to, I guess we have a video games like curriculum in our media program at UNB.
Hmm.
And I thought, well, we could use like a little bit of a tabletop element for the students as well. So maybe I can be that person and I can kind of bring my hobby design interests into my research and into my teaching. And I think that was the step that led me to where I am now over the last 5 years. It really accelerated. I started learning about games in education and serious games and the way that lots of people are kind of studying games in academia now, studying tabletop games. So there's like a little group of analog game scholars, basically, like,
Yeah.
and so I dabble a little bit in that, and that's what my history research is on. And then I'm also it's fun because I'm in a creative program, media production. There's students making video games, making films, doing a lot of graphic design. So I'm just kind of bringing my interest in that and sort of the creative side of game design
Hmm.
into the program as well.
And so you're saying to the students, like, well, why not tabletop, right? Which is a great option for a lot of people who maybe
Yeah,
want to work with some more physical media, or want something more tangible and analog to work on. And I think that's a great avenue, when so much is digital and so much is like remote and so much is disconnected. When we can sit around a table and do something, that there's really something special there. So
yeah,
your origin story goes all the way back, right? And are you originally from New Brunswick?
yeah, yeah. I grew up in St. John, and now I live and work in Fredericton. It's about an hour away. So it's kind of just a coincidence, really, that I applied for the position, and it just, I was just finishing and starting to go on the job market. A job came up back in New Brunswick. I thought, well, I'll apply, see what happens. They'll fly me in, and I'll get, if I get an interview, I'll just be able to visit my family,
Yeah.
and that'll be it probably. And then I got the job, and so I was
Hey.
suddenly moving from Toronto back to New
Hmm.
Brunswick. So,
And so you said you had a childhood love of baseball, and what's the baseball scene like in New Brunswick?
well, Little League, and
Yeah.
then cheering for the Expos until they left.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, basically, I played Little League, um, and there isn't any
Yeah.
professional baseball or anything like that. But yeah.
All right. So we're going to move into like the thing we wanted to talk about mostly today was like the history of Canadian board games. So
Hmm.
in your research, you are taking a look at this aspect of Canadian media, and you're doing it through the lens of like media studies.
Yeah, yeah. I would say media studies, cultural studies, and like notions of like mm, sort of the sort of production of culture, like through popular culture,
Right.
and national cultures, right?
Mm.
National identity, and yeah,
And so what are your overall findings before we go into like the specifics of which game is the oldest and all that kind of stuff?
all the
What
details, like
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
The
What did you
overall,
find out? Yeah.
well, it's still pretty early.
Mhm.
And I think started thinking about this 2 or 3 years ago, but last year, this past 12 months, I was on sabbatical. So it was my main research project during sabbatical. So I'm still kind of gathering the archival stuff and sorting through things and thinking it through, like what exactly is my argument going to be here. Um, but I'm kind of framing it the way that I framed some material that I wrote and some research that I did on Canadian film and television. So I'm taking the approach of it being a lot of the study of Canadian film and television is looking for some kind of essence of Canadianness that is unique from American film and television, for
Right.
example. So that tends to favor and highlight um, movies that are kind of dramatic illustrations of Canadian history, or some kind of auteurist, artisanal kind of like, you know, uh, dramas that kind of say something about what it is to be Canadian. And what I was interested in is popular culture. I was interested in horror movies. I was interested in, like, science fiction, action movies, crime dramas, and those tend to get ignored a little bit less so now. But when I was studying it 10, 15 years ago, they were less often highlighted in the research on Canadian film. So I wrote a little bit, and I studied how we can think of those as just as Canadian if we're not really like focused on trying to extract what is uniquely special about them, but instead just see that there's a kind of industry in Canada where we can produce like stuff that is popular, that is interesting, that is fun to watch. It doesn't have to say anything specific about Canada when it's made. Um, it can be international. It can be enjoyed by anyone. And so I'm kind of taking the same approach to the games too. It's more of an industrial approach
Hmm.
rather than looking for something inherently what it makes our games different than American games or German games. I'm not really looking at it that way. I'm more looking at it as what are the unique circumstances of the industry in Canada, and maybe from there we can see some things that make us different. Um, and so a lot of the work is just at the beginning has been looking at the history of the different companies that existed in Canada,
Hmm.
and how the industry evolved and changed. And uh, interestingly, the whole tariff thing blowing up over the last year
Right.
and a half or so is so pertinent, because a lot of the history of the industry, this is one of my general observations early on here, is that it's always been like this. It's always been um, game companies emerged because the economic conditions were good at that moment, and then things changed. Tariffs came in or something, and all the companies went out of business. And then, 15 years later, something emerges again. So, yeah.
Everything that's new is old again, or new old is new again, or something like that. And do you see like a cycle of these events of like boom and bust in the games industry? When times are good, a bunch of companies start up, and when times are bad, a lot of them fold. Some of them might survive, some of them might get reincarnated later on. But that is interesting. And um, I wonder I wonder if that coincides with other countries in the global scheme of things, and I'm sure it does. We just probably didn't know about that, like even 10, 15 years ago, when the global information wasn't as readily available. Because I know a lot of companies that just like absolutely got crushed by COVID, and then the tariff was really like the nail in the coffin for a lot of companies, right? That were making
Hmm.
good product, they just couldn't ship them to the biggest customer base, which is usually in the States, right? So it's interesting. Have you noticed anything else other than this like cycle that is is there is there anything that you were saying, we often look for that little bit of Canadian essence. Is there anything in the game industry that you've kind of said like that is particularly Canadian?
Um, I think, sort of tentatively, there's a couple of things. Like, I think that um, you kind of, I have to sort of map this onto the different kind of moments in Canadian, like, strong sense of Canadian national identity
Hmm.
at certain moments. And so there's definitely, I don't think it's uniquely Canadian, but there's definitely a thing that's happening with pride, like Canadian sort of emphasis on Canadian identity and pride during the First World War, during the Second World War. The first kind of wave happens like during the First World War, and we see that in Canadian like movies and literature and so on too. So I can see it in the games. We see some of the first advertisements that are pointing out like this is a Canadian game happen at that time. Whereas there's not a whole lot of reason for companies to highlight that as a selling point, like at other times, right? So there are certain moments where the companies think this is worthwhile pointing out to our customers to sort of, to say this, that we've got a game here that was made by a Canadian designer, for example. And that happens again, like in the 1970s, and that sort of coincides with Trivial Pursuit, which comes out at the end of the 1970s, and then there's a whole craze to make board game. Everyone thinks they're going to make the next Trivial Pursuit and get rich, and there's tons of newspaper articles all through the 80s talking about this like Canadian game design madness, like this bubble that happens because everybody thinks like, oh, those guys made a game, I can make a game. So that's an interesting moment that's particularly Canadian, I think.
And you kind of see that happening now too with tariffs and just the way relationships are currently going between Canada and the US, where there are designers that are saying, hey, this game is a Canadian game or it is Canadian designer. So as Sen mentioned before, there are things that are old that are new again and vice versa. It's also interesting to see that games are not something that you just see in a vacuum. Like so much of Euro games come out of the reaction to the war and what was happening in Europe. Ameritrash can kind of be rooted in American individualism a little bit with competition. Is there something, and you've been kind of talking a bit about, is there something that we could point to say that like, oh, the Canadian pride and nationalism that we're seeing during the wars and during certain moments fit its way into games? Like, can you point to something and be like, okay, yeah, this is a Euro game. This feels like very European. This is a Ameritrash, feels very like American design. Is there anything that we could point to Canadian games just to say like, is there just an inherent politeness? Like you mentioned Trivial Pursuit. It's not
Sorry was not invented by Canadians, I don't think.
I was hoping it's like, is that, we should claim that one. That should just get an honorary Canadian citizenship.
Yeah.
Hafiz, you're doing exactly what I said. People are always trying to do, right? Like, can we find what is that uniquely Canadian thing that our mechanic that is like, or something like that. I don't have a problem with people looking for those things, and maybe you can find them. I think it's an interesting question, but I'm not expecting to find that probably like that. I think inevitably, our games look like other games, and if there's one of the big things I'm taking away from studying the history of games is just how rare new ideas actually are, and how everything is really just a copy of something else with a little tweak here and there that goes way back. So it's fun to see certain things like that. I think, oh, wait a minute, that's a pretty early example of this, and it's Canadian. Now, it's hard to say if it is the first, for example, but it doesn't necessarily, I couldn't actually tie it directly to the fact that the person was in Canada I think one of the examples of this is there's a game from 1915 that I stumbled across called Fighting with the Allies. That is a First World War game. It actually doesn't depict Canada. It depicts other countries in Europe that are, so it's very much a kind of British Empire game made by a Canadian, but it's definitely a Canadian indie game. It was like the guy who made it and published it himself in Canada. And I think it's got the earliest example of an event deck that I've ever seen in a game. I was trying to figure out maybe Monopoly had with the chance cards, like you could call that an event deck, but this is a war game. Like, so it's explicitly a war game with an event deck from 1915, and it's Canadian. So there's interesting kind of things like that, but I don't know if I could then say something about that person being Canadian is like um, as a connection to that.
Hmm. It is pretty interesting how polarizing the concept of the Euro game and the quote unquote Ameritrash games. The Americans, by the way, do not like it when you say trash next to American. But um like, and it's funny, being in the industry for 20 years now, seeing Canadians come up and taking a little bit of that and a little bit of that and mashing it together, and maybe that's what we do best. I don't know. But I think more and more all the games are getting very not flat and homogenized. I just mean that the ones that are in the Ameritrash style aren't always from America, and the ones that are from the Euro game lineage aren't always from Europe. And I think we're just seeing like globally that more people are making games, but there are definitely things about games from other countries that seem like that's a thing from that country, right? Like, if you've ever gone to the Tokyo game market, there's something about the games that market particularly produces and the producers that work there, because of their ethos in design, which is very handmade DIY. These are 500 copies. You'll never see this game again, and it comes in like a Ziploc bag, And then there's like physical reasons why that's like that, because space is so valuable. And other games in other countries where they have to like keep their games in like humidors because their climate is so damp that it'll just rot through the cardboard. And so they have a different realization about things. I do think that games in Canada, uh, like the Midwest and like the northern states, kind of go hand in hand, because like we got so much time to do almost nothing when the snow hits, right? And so I
Hmm.
think there's something about that might be inherently Canadian. I was wondering, should we give Matt Leacock an honorary Canadian citizenship? I think he'd accept, because do we play more co-ops because we're inherently polite people? I don't know. Um,
Yeah, well, we may have invented the co-op game here. I know that Rainer Nietzsche likes to take credit for it in terms of board games, but
hmm,
maybe the most prolific game designer that's Canadian is Jim Decove at Family Pastimes. Do you know
hmm,
about
hmm,
Family Pastimes? Right? Um, like he was making, he's made over 100 co-op games, and he started in 1972. He's like an independent company that he retired a few years ago, I think, and I'm not sure if he still owns the company, but that's one of the great stories in my book. If this book comes out, it would be like that company is a good example of something that maybe people don't really think about being
hmm.
Canadian, but
While you were
Right,
researching, did you
and
come
those.
across anything else? Oh, sorry, go first then.
No, you go.
I was just wondering, was there anything else that you came across as you're doing your research that you thought was just particularly interesting? Like you mentioned the first, possibly the first event deck or cooperative games. So something that you're doing research on, you're like, I didn't realize that this might have roots in Canadian game design.
hmm. Well, I mean, it. I think it's more just like the interesting stories, like more so than the bigger like conclusion. It's just it's it's finding a specific game um, and an interesting story behind it, that the designer and like and sometimes finding games. There's a lot of these games I still want to play, and I until I get a chance to play them, I've seen pictures of them and I've cobbled together like a sense of what the rules are, but I still want to sit down with someone. And if it's a two-player like hockey game, I want to play it out and really. So I think it looks interesting. It might have some interesting mechanics that could hold up today, for example. It's not just a clone of something else, but it looks a little bit unique and original. So I like pulling out those specific stories. There's a really interesting hockey game that was made in the 1960s, and I looked at it and said, "This is different. This is like a combination of kind of an abstract game, but also a hockey game, two-player. I think it's called. Do I have it here? I made some notes. I didn't write that one down, but then it turns out that the designer or the co-designer is Herb Carnegie, who is a legendary African American or African Canadian um, hockey player and hockey coach, someone from Toronto who has discovered online like a whole life and a whole history outside of just the fact that there's a line in his biography that he made this game in the 1960s and they published it and printed a few thousand copies and sold it and then kind of it was forgotten. So I like finding those stories and I'd like to kind of write them out and have people kind of learn about these different moments where people made games in Canada.
Mhm. And that to me is quintessentially Canadian as well. Like that you're not looking for like we're number one in anything necessarily, but that
Yeah.
it's just a good story. It's a good story, and we like that. That in itself may be the most Canadian thing that we've said today. Luke, who's also Canadian, he's out in BC, asked, "Are there any Canadian histories that you would want to see explored in a game?"
Oh, there are so many. So, um, I mean, that's one of my interests in doing things Canadian is that I'm kind of a Canadian, like a Canadian history buff. I love Canadian history and culture and stories, and so I would, as much as I say I'm interested in studying all the games, regardless of whether they have any specific Canadian content. I would love to see more games about Canada and Canadian history made in Canada by Canadians. So we've
Mhm.
had a few games made, internationally by European designers and occasionally American designers that just happen to be set in Canada,
Right.
and they have no obligation to kind of do our history the way that we'd like it to see it done or in detail and so on. Um, but I would like to see some. I mean, we're really having a moment, I think, in like historical gaming, where like war gaming is turning into history gaming and exploring all kinds of other ways to represent history. Um, and I'd love to see some of those games cover Canadian stories. So, is there any one in particular I'd like to
Yeah.
see? Hmm. I think a really good game about Champlain and like a really rich, nuanced sort of coal whirly kind of like game about either Hudson's Bay Company or
Yeah.
the relationship between the first French explorers and indigenous cultures. Um, that is not just a French and Indian War kind of game about the British and the French and there were natives there and they kind of like were on one side or the other, blah blah blah, but kind of maybe told more from a uh, like from maybe from an indigenous perspective or all three equally, like really understanding what the relationship was and
Mhm.
how it's much more complex than most war games make it out to be, for example.
Right. Right. Hafiz, what area of Canadian history would you like to see made into a game?
I am biased because I work in an archive, and I was actually literally looking through First World War propaganda for a program we're developing this earlier today. But I had a box next to me of Eaton's catalogs, and so something about the Eaton's department store and just kind of branching out and selling creepy dolls. I think that would be really funny. Um, Sen, I will
Mm-hmm.
send you a picture at some point of a
Are the
doll from
creepy
the
dolls?
1890s.
Okay.
It is something else.
Super creepy. Super creepy.
Yeah, yeah, stuff of nightmares. So I think something along those lines. Development of cities. I think it would be really fun to have almost a um, something looking at like the elites and how they built things up, but then how else they hoarded power. So something like on the Family Compact or um, uh, something along those lines, almost like a robber barons, but like development of the city of City of Toronto or a different city, regardless of how it is. City of Toronto one could be fun because you could just burn it down and that's the end of a round and then start back and then
Start
burn
up
it.
again.
'Cause we've had
That
several
happens.
of those fires. Yeah. So, Sen, how about you though? Is there anything that would catch your fancy if you saw it on a shelf?
That's very Canadian. That's a really good question. I mean, there's so much. Canada's such a huge country, right? That obviously, I think learning more about the indigenous cultures that were here before us is really. I mean, that's a great avenue as long as it's done respectfully. There's been some games like you were saying, Scott, that were made by Europeans that like have no clue of like that's not what those people don't use totem poles. What are we doing?
Yeah.
And they like consulted absolutely nobody.
Yep.
But there's also like I think maybe some games about like I really like the Hudson Bay Company idea. That's actually a really interesting thing because of how that basically was like a commercial venture that explored ostensibly all of Canada. But it was first and foremost like we need to make money doing this. Um, the whole idea of like, well, my son is moving out to the East Coast for school. He's going to Dal. Sorry, he's not going to UND, but he'll be at Dalhousie. So this is going to be my first real big trip out east, and I think the East Coast is just fascinating. There's so much interesting history in those provinces, and unfortunately, like the East Coast tends to get like this, just like completely overshadowed by Ontario and BC and Alberta, right? But
Yep.
there and Quebec. But there's so much cool stuff that is happening out there that would be really interesting to look into as well. Um, anyways,
Well,
I don't know what I would
Sen,
make particularly, but yes.
there just might be a game coming out that covers some of
Oh,
that.
there might be. There you go. We'll talk about that in a second. Hey, Deadpan, how are you doing? So yeah, I think there's like the Canadian, the history of Canada in games is very different than the history of Canadian games, but I think there's some place for that. Like I was actually quite happy with a few acres of snow. It's just like
Yep.
like just playing it and like
Hmm.
reading the essay was actually pretty good.
Yep.
Eves made the Northwest Passage game, which is really good. Eves is very into like Canadian history and Quebecois history and stuff like that. And so there's definitely some stuff that could be done that don't even showcase like a particular part of history, but maybe a particular cultural thing. Like he was making a game, a trick taking game actually, about just like voyageurs, and they just had voyagers in these canoes, and it's like this is just cool to see like having our culture represented on cards is really neat.
Yep.
I mean, obviously we could have a game about Poutine, that'd be fine. But that's
There
not
is a
all the
game.
cultures. Yeah.
There's a little card game. Did Scorpion Masqué put that out, or
Probably that would be something they would
Miss
do.
Miss Poutine? It's called. I picked it
Uh,
up, at Value Village in Quebec a couple years ago.
Yeah.
that's
There's
hilarious.
there's a maple syrup game. There's a Muskoka game that's out there.
There's
So
Yeah.
it's
they're
getting there.
coming. They're coming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. How many chairs can you sit in? That's a Muskoka game. There. Everybody out there who's not from the Muskoka area, there are literal chairs called Muskoka chairs. They're a specific style of chair. Yeah. So tell us, what is the oldest game that has a Canadian origin? Because I know that question comes up a lot, so we might as well ask it.
Hmm. So right now, I think that I can pretty confidently say that I'm not going to find anything. There may have been something, but I've exhausted all of the research that I can do, I think. So something might still come up, but I've looked through digital newspaper archives and old advertising from the late 19th century, and I see a lot of ads for games and from department stores selling games. I've looked through the publishing companies that I know existed at the time. Cop Clark was the main one in Toronto. And so I know what they put out. And the earliest one they put out where they explicitly said this is a Canadian designed game, and it's got a Canadian topic too, is called lacrosse or
Huh. Interesting.
encosis. It's got a weird name, encosis, Enkosis, which I haven't been able to trace to what it might mean, but it's called the game of lacrosse. And it's a
Hmm.
two-player sort of abstract checkers kind of game, themed around the game of lacrosse. And it's made by a Canadian company, 100% Canadian company, Cop Clark in Toronto. I've been able to find the designer's name, and they are Canadian. There's a patent that I found shows that was the designer who made it, and I traced their family history. And like I said, it's on a Canadian subject,
Hmm.
Canadian sport. So it's a pretty good candidate, and that's 1892.
Okay.
So unlikely to find anything made and published in Canada before that, because that's kind of the first golden age of like board game publishing. Parker Brothers began around that time, and yeah,
Right. Would we consider Crokinole as a board game, or is that like a different class of game in terms of what you're looking at? Because
right.
that was like
So
1870s,
Crokinole
right?
is, yeah, but it's tricky because Crokinole, it's harder to trace its origin and the exact person who made it. It was definitely popularized in Canada, um, in the 1870s or 1880s, but there are arguments made online that it may have been like it may emerged in upstate New York and then crossed the border. Um, but the most important thing is that we can't really identify a designer. So I'm thinking of dating this argument around um, games, like modern games in which we can point to this was created at this time by this person.
Right.
Um,
Because
and Crokinole,
there's an industry around it, right?
yeah, and it's just at that moment where um, we, except for a few earlier examples, like it's the moment where we start to think of game design as a creative activity that people are associated with, rather than games
Hmm.
just as sort of folk culture that just kind of like we don't know where it came from, and we only have a sense that it's been around for a long time.
Yeah, and like it's like Crokinole is a game, right? And but it seems more like it was a woodworking project or something like that. Like as instead of like a like a designed game, like in the modern sense, right? So it does feel a little more
Yeah,
like folk craft. Not that it's a bad thing, but it's just maybe
no,
different, maybe a different thing, right?
that's right.
Um, what is it called? Oh, provenance, I guess, is what you're really looking for then, right? Like a direct lineage, a provenance of the artifact.
Yeah, and that would just be my definition. When I
Hmm.
write this all up, I'll just qualify it that way. That
Yeah, so
you
you
can
know,
make arguments for other things, but
yeah, so my friends at Tracy Boards, if you're reading the book, you know, don't get upset that they don't that Scott doesn't put Crokinole in like a big section. Maybe he'll put it in the forward and say, "I understand Crokinole was around this time, but you know." I think we do have to put that kind of caveat on things with you know, research that you're looking at a specific thing at a specific way, and this is what I found based on these criteria, and people then can go discuss and argue, and that's actually kind of the purpose of doing research and whatnot. Is not to uncover all the truths, but to also create some curiosity around what other truths are there, right? What other things can we find? So, tell us about Resolve. What is Resolve, and what are you doing there?
so Resolve is my applied game design or applied game research group at UNB. And I set it up with the intention of studying games, games for change or serious games. I like to call it applied game design because I'm not a fan of the the, the term serious games.
Hmm.
Um,
It's too serious.
and yeah, it's a kind of a it yeah. I think it's misleading. Um, and applied game design just kind of captures for me the fact that you're trying to use games and design games for a purpose, some specific purpose,
Hmm.
beyond just for fun. And I thought, well, that's a way to bring it into academia and like into my research. And I really wanted to learn about them and study them by making them, which is kind of a theme in our program that we tell students that when you study media at UNB, you learn about media by making it. And so I think I had that in mind, that I would start a research group. We would make some games, some serious games, and the students would be involved, and they would be doing internships, work study, and they would make them alongside me, and we would take on a project, make a game for a partner or a unit on campus, and then kind of go from there. And we've done one tabletop game so far, a card game about the history of UNB. We went through the whole process of designing it and publishing it, printing it, with a manufacturer in China and shipping copies over here, and learn the whole thing from A to Z, how to do that. So basically, I'm running it a little bit like a game design studio at this
Hmm.
point. Yeah.
And then the students come out of that with like actual knowledge and skills of doing, like, from like, what is this saying, from soup to nuts, or nuts to soup? I don't know how. It's a saying that I don't use. But they've seen the parts, they've seen how the sausage is made, right? They've done the
Yeah.
design, they've, done like a minimum order, they've gone through all the landing of the goods and taking it from there to the next stage, maybe, right? It's the next thing.
Yeah.
And so when you guys are doing these projects, how do you pick which project you're doing? Is it, what's readily available? Is it what another unit wants, is asking for? Do you have people making requests of you across the campus and maybe the city that need a game or want a game? How do you do that?
Um, it's it's I think we haven't quite reached that point where we have a lot of people approaching us. We've had a few people chat with me at various events and say, "Oh, we should meet sometime and talk about how you might be able to do something for us." And so there's some people have expressed some interest, but for the most part, you know, I don't think that a lot of people get it yet. Like they don't. There, there's still a fairly niche thing, like to
Yeah.
do these kinds of games, right? And so I've basically been trying to get us with that first game, especially in the books now, um, like have a proof of concept, like
Yeah.
kind
This is
of
what we can
no one,
do.
yeah, like now we can show you we actually did it, and here's what we did
Yeah. It's
for.
it's that foot in the door. It's your calling card, right? Literally,
Mhm,
it's a card game.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
So I do want to know, like, with this concept, right? That you have games, you have academics, you have students doing the work alongside the academics to come up with a project and come up with an end product. What makes a serious game serious? Why do we call them serious games?
Well, this is a big one, Sen.
Yeah, I know. That's why I
Yeah.
ask you. This is not my area of research, so I'm asking you.
um, so y- that term that term was coined as a kind of intentional oxymoron,
Hmm.
um, by a fellow. Um, oh boy, I'm going to blank on his name now. Um, Around 1970, um, and he wrote a book, and called Serious Games, and the intention was to gather up all of the examples of things that were happening in the 1950s and 60s, kind of growing out of think tanks, social science think tanks in the United States. The first kind of people taking games seriously, running like simulations of what like the Cold War, for example, and using it for military strategy, political, and sort of urban planning, things like that. SimCity ultimately comes out of that moment as well, too,
Hmm.
right? Like, um, and you can see right there in his book, he defines it as these are games made with a purpose beyond entertainment. It's not that they're made to not be entertaining. They're supposed to be entertaining. That's what makes games engaging and worthwhile doing. But they still have some extra thing that beyond just entertainment that they're trying to achieve. Model a complex system, um, create something that can be a learning experience, a new way of training someone to do something that is more like training nurses, for example, like in a more engaging way, or running them through a simulation. So there's just a lot of threads that ultimately can be gathered up with that term, serious games. Um, but it also kind of, if people don't hear that whole explanation, they think, oh, that doesn't sound fun, right? It's serious
It
games. You're
sounds
taking the
serious.
fun out of them. So
Why
that's
would
why I
I ever
don't
want to
particularly
spend my
like
life
it.
doing that? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I
No,
wouldn't
I get
ever
it.
want someone to think that something that Resolve is making, or anyone else who's working in that area, I wouldn't want anyone to think you have to be serious when you play this. No, no, no. It's still fun. Like, that's crucial that it's fun and that it's engaging. Um, it's but it there's something more there, right? Than
Right.
just yeah.
Yeah, and often that more is sort of um, expressed as like a learning outcome or something like that, where there's like a, to say an agenda is not, it sounds loaded because it's not really an agenda, but it's more like there's an outcome that we expect the player to have one way or another by playing this game. They're going there. There should be a. It's like more than fun. It's fun, but more than that. Super duper fun. I don't know. And so you're making some games right now that would they be considered serious games because you're doing them to resolve? Uh, like, so tell, first of all, I mean, just tell us about Paradoxides. So what's it about? Is it a serious game? And how does, what is the seriousness of it if it is a serious game?
Yeah. So the I don't know how to pronounce these scientific terms, so I think the pronunciation is Paradoxides.
Oh, it probably
But
is.
we'd have to ask like a someone
It was more scientific
who
than you or
studies
I.
trilobites. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So Paradoxides is a game about the history of geology and paleontology in Canada, specifically on the East Coast, in the 19th century. So the beginnings of the first fossil hunters, the first geoscientists in Canada. Um, because most of the things that
Hmm.
were happening in Canada were happening in everything from Ontario eastward, um, and the discovery of the dinosaurs and so on out west was not didn't happen until later. So the early study of rocks and fossils began mostly on the East Coast, and some of the biggest names and important scientists either were out there or had origins there, like William Dawson, who became the president of McGill and was the greatest scientist of Canadian scientists in the 19th century. He was from Nova Scotia. He began as a fossil hunter and a rock collector, studying or studying the geology of Nova Scotia, and then eventually went on to central Canada. So there's lots of cool stories like that. And the purpose of the game, we started out, talking to a geoscientist and saying, let's make a game where people can learn about, like a learning game about geology and the history of fossil hunting in Canada. That's kind of the goal of it, but I'm really reticent to call it an educational game, because I think that, again, it's the same thing as calling it a serious game.
It
It sort
is
of
the same. It's like the death knell of all
puts,
games.
yeah, it puts that taint on it.
Yeah.
So I'm experimenting with this new game. We're really experimenting at Resolve. This is only our second game of approaching it much more from a commercial perspective and putting the research into it in the background, but then presenting it at trying to compete in the marketplace with other games.
Right.
And then just let people play it and go, oh, like Wingspan, I can learn about birds when I play this game.
And this
but
way you can learn about trilobites and the Canadian geoscience scene of that time. And you're right. I looked it up. It is paradoxides, which makes more sense than paradoxides.
Yeah, it's funner to say once you get your tongue around it.
Yeah. And then you have another one called Dominion Bridge Company. And that you said that this is not one that you're necessarily doing through Resolve, but this is more of a personal endeavor.
Yeah, that's the long gestating like hobby designer side of me that in my free time, fiddling around with different game ideas and taking a weekend and going to Toronto. I did that a couple of different times before I met Hafiz at that one. But just looking for playtesters and looking to connect to the scene. Like, you guys are super lucky to have so many people around you. Like, when I go up there, I get such amazing feedback from all the designers that I meet. And I crave that. So I made the trek a few different times with some other prototypes. This is the one that kind of stuck, and I realized, okay, I'm onto something. I feel good about this one. And so Dominion Bridge Company is about the history of bridge building in Canada. And the most famous bridge building company was Dominion Bridge Company, located in Montreal. And so it's a dice rolling, dice drafting, bidding game where you're running a bridge building company in the late 19th, early 20th century.
And it is currently nominated as a finalist in the Canadian Board Game Design Award.
Yes, it is. Both of them are actually Paradoxides and Dominion Bridge Company.
Paradoxides, yeah.
we just entered them. I'd been planning to enter Dominion Bridge Company for a couple of years, and I just didn't quite pull it all together in time to meet the deadline. And this year I was like, I'm going to get it ready and I'm going to submit it. And we just had Paradoxides about ready at the same stage. We were like, this is close enough to done that we could submit that too. So I said to my students, let's just put in an application and see what happens. And we were super blown away to have both of them be shortlisted. So we'll see what happens this weekend. That's when the announcement comes out, which one wins.
Now, has your research in Canadian board games influenced your own game design? Like, was there anything that came up when you were researching where you're just like, I like this idea, I'm going to fiddle around with it. Oh, this works really well with this topic that I'm very much interested in.
Yeah, I think definitely with Paradoxides, because that's the one that we've been designing for the last year and a half, almost exactly at the same time that I'm doing all this research on early games and trying to make sense of what games were in the 19th century. When were the first board games made? What were the first mechanics? I'm trying to overcome the bias against roll and move games. I'm trying really hard to understand and see why they were fun for people back then, and of course, make them a little bit more strategic, but not just necessarily avoid them completely. So there's an element of that in Paradoxides. There's no dice, but there is a path that you're moving around and a series of spaces that you land on. You just get to choose. Do you move 1, 2, or 3 spaces? A little bit like a rondelle.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we love rondelles.
Yeah, it's just like, imagine if you removed the dice from Monopoly and you got to choose 1, 2, or 3 spaces each turn. Then it becomes a little bit like a rondelle. And one thing I think about those games is that they're very easy for people to sit down and start playing, because in our game in Paradoxities, I just show them, you can go to this space, which will allow you to do this, go to this space, which will allow you to do that, or go to this space, allow you to do that. So you have a choice, and whatever you do, it says right on the space, like what you will do when you land on it. So
Right.
it just makes it kind of easy to ease people into the game. And we want our game to have a wide audience. We're hoping to sell it in gift shops and science centers and things like that. So I don't want the learning curve to be too steep for people to learn all these new mechanics. And
Yeah, I think there's, the bias against roll and write is literally that you don't have a choice. But if you start increasing the choices that you have, either where you land gives you choice, or how you move through the cycle gives you choice, or your path, or the path branches, or things like that, then
yeah,
it's more reasonable as a modern style game. Because one of the things it does, the track really tells a story, right? That's the thing that I like
yeah,
about games that are on tracks, is that it
hmm
really tells a story. And by the way, I mean, for those of you who are out there going, well, I don't really like roll and moves and things like that. Do you guys know what the most popular games over the last couple of months have been? They've been games like Magical Athlete, and games that are
hmm
ostensibly like they're kind of like a roll and write, but your
hmm
choice of your draft of who you pick to be your racers and all those things, they make it interesting, because they play out kind of like auto battlers, and that's sort
hmm
of an interesting thing. I do all my choosing at the beginning. I let the game run, and based on my analysis of the run, then I can make decisions again at the end. It's more like you're a manager of a system, I think, which is what Scott really liked about games like Stratomatic Baseball,
yeah,
where you could manage a whole team over a course of a season. You're just managing racers on a track, and now you're managing geoscientists as they go look up,
yeah,
look for fossils on the
yeah.
beaches of the eastern provinces. So, what else is there in the future for you? River Pilot Game Studio. What is that all about?
That is my sort of there's a longer story that we won't get into today, but I'm trying to figure out a way to extract the stuff that I do at UNB, and give it a life after we create it. And
Right.
what happened with the UNB card game is that we didn't really think through fully what we would do once we made the game, and so we found ourselves acting like a publisher, basically, like
Sure. Now
like
what?
trying to get the game
You got like
in
500 copies sitting
stores.
in your
Like
store. What are you going to do?
we're like talking to the bookstore, getting it there. We're talking to local stores to get it in consignment, and so we're
Yeah.
learning the whole sales and distribution
Yeah.
side.
You should
But
put
that's
something in like the alum newsletter.
yes, yeah. We're
Yeah.
working on that.
That's
Yeah,
great.
this at Christmas.
Perfect
But
stocking
that's
stuffer for the alumni.
for all. Yeah, yeah. UNB pride. Yeah.
Yeah.
So my latest idea is that going forward with Paradoxities and other games, if I have an existing external company, then
Right.
we can take the game we make at UNB, and if it has some legs, we think, then we can license it to the external company,
Right. And so UNB would
and kind of
still receive
yeah,
some royalties from the external sales, but you could handle it at a different level and a more
all the
commercial
money.
basis. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And then it becomes a little bit of a like an indie publisher
Yeah.
that I can run, and maybe we can publish Dominion Bridge Company or like other games and so on.
That didn't go through
Um,
the Resolve process, or
yeah,
the Resolve
yeah,
lab, which is kind of like a little incubator, which is really cool,
yeah,
for the
yeah.
students. And how long are the students with you? Are they there for like their undergrad, or do you have grad students at Resolve, or do people kind of
Um,
come in and out of it based on the courses they select?
yeah, it's 2 to 3 years usually the most. Like
Hmm.
I have one student that is just leaving now next week, but she's been with me for 3 years, and she's been working all summer on Paradoxies with us, but she's going off
Wow.
to do her BED. So anywhere from 1 to 3 years has been like the most. But I definitely would like to be able to have that company and then hire some of them,
Right.
exactly like an incubator, like
Yeah,
because
yeah,
they're
yeah.
all trained and ready to go. They know how to
Yeah.
do everything, like, and that's
Yeah,
hard to
and like
find. So,
that would be a great thing to put on your program. Our grads have a 98.3% hire rate.
well, the company would have to do really well to hire all of them, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
That's pretty funny. Cool. So we are literally at the end of the show. It is time to say goodbye. So if you'd like to talk to me more, you can reach me at Senfeng Lim on Blue Sky. Hafiz is.
I'm on Instagram at Burnt Drink Games. And Scott?
You can find me probably on the Resolve website, or Games with Resolve,
Okay.
on Instagram.
And then you can reach out to tabletop at unb.ca. And you
Yep.
can find more about Paradoxities at www.paradoxitiesgame.com. And we warned you, we told you at the beginning you'd have to give some final advice. So, what is your sage advice, Scott?
My advice is explore the history of games, and pull yourself away from the hotness now and then, and pick up an old game, whether that old just means 2008 or 1968 or 1928. But there's a lot of interesting things that you can learn, and whether you're a game designer or just a game fan, from older games too. So develop an interest in or an appreciation for the whole history of games.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Scott. We'll see you soon. Hafiz, got any last words?
No, it's been great having you on here, hearing more about the games that you're creating. Hopefully, we might see you at Protospiel in the fall.
I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Try to get there.
Yeah. And good luck on the awards this weekend.
Thank you so much. Thanks
All
for
right,
having me.
No problem. We'll see you later. Bye, everybody.